All right. So this week's parsha is Parshat Lech Lecha. Parshat Lech Lecha, as we mentioned already last week, we have the adage, the Hasidic adage that says that the first two Torah portions have been a little bit of a roller coaster ride. The first Torah portion starts off all happy, the creation of the world, and Kitov, and all that, but it ends off relatively sad, or not relatively, very sad, because at the end of the first Torah portion, God has regretted the way mankind is in this world, and He has resolved to hit the reset button. That is um, uh, Parshat Bereshit. Comes Parshat Noach, and it paints a little bit of a different picture. Starts off sad, destruction of the world, eradication of all of mankind, but it ends off happy because we get introduced to Avram. So it's been a roller coaster the first 2 weeks. Then we have finally Parshat Lech. This week's Torah portion starts happy, stays happy all the way through. We get introduced to Avraham, and every day of this week, in other words, all seven aliyot, all seven sections of the parsha, each one gets explored one day of the week. We have been living with Avraham and the development of Avraham into God's champion and the first Jew. So it really is a parsha with so much good stuff, as it were, to learn from. I think, as we talked about, that this becomes evident from the very way that the parsha opens up with the story of Abraham. And it opens up, as we've talked about, and we've talked about this in the past, 70 years into Abraham's life. Abraham is not a youngster. We are talking about him already over a third of the way through his life. You know, for most people, 70 years is, the majority, the vast majority of their lives, but not back in those days. But we know that Abraham is going to live for a total of 175 years. And so 70 years into his life is a significant chunk of it. And it's not just that we've missed a significant amount of his years, we've missed a significant amount of events, not just personal events, but monumental events in the development of monotheism, as it were. If Avram is the champion of God, many of those events that made him the champion of God have been left out of the recording of the Torah, including God's seminal discovery of God at the age of 3. Avraham, right, at the age of 3, he looks around and he ponders all these things that he sees the rest of the world holds as powers, be it the sun, the moon, the mountains, whatever else it might be. And each one of them he calls into question how this can in fact be God, right? They are all limited in power. The sun gets pushed away by the moon gets pushed away by the sun. The mountains are massive and powerful, but they only exist here. They do not exist in heaven. Winds get blocked by all these things. It goes through all of it, and he comes to realize that none of these can be the true power. None of them can be not only the true power, they can't be the true source of anything. And so he comes to realize a truth, even at the age of 3 years old, a little babe, that the true power is one being, the creator of all, that is not seen or touched or fathomed in any finite way. And he embarks on his not only journey of discovery, but journey of evangelism, right? To share this truth with the whole world. In his journey of doing so, he bumps up against somebody who is not too thrilled with what he is doing in sharing all this information. Actually, two such somebodies. One is Terach, his own father, who's not only uh, 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 a broker in the idol business, right? Terach has an idol shop, sells idols for a living. So that means not only is he invested in idolatry, right? His family business is idolatry, but Terach is also chief pagan, chief idolater, because we have to keep in mind that what gives you the ability to have a idol shop back in those days To be the one who sells the idols in a pagan society is not just a person who can get them manufactured in China for cheapest and has got good sales, on idols, but this is their deities. The one who sells the idols is the one that the people trust most to know about this. You have to be the chief pagan in order to be the one who is trusted by the people to create the idols. So Terach, Avram's own father, is not just a pagan, but he is the chief pagan. So we can imagine that he is pretty bothered by his son's life choices. But not only is he bothered, but Terach's immediate boss. He is the chief pagan because he is the chief servant, our minister, our chamberlain of the god that the people were serving in that area. It wasn't a god made of stone or a god made of rock or wood. It was a god made of flesh, and a fellow named Nimrod. Nimrod had turned himself into a god. Right? This was Nimrod, a very powerful king who turned himself into a god. Rocks and wood can be god. Why can't a human be a god? And he was a god. At least that's what he put down on his resume. And his right hand was this Terach. So all this in life, Abraham's life choices, Avram's insistence at that point, not rather Avraham, but Avram's life choices at that time, his philosophy obviously runs in direct antithesis to his father and to the king, the powerful dictator of that region.
Just for interrupting. There's some interesting commentary on that suggests that really Terach was on his way to leaving idol worship, and they go to the sentence that says Terach took Abraham and his family out. So it's right. Terach really initiating the going even more than Abraham, which I found that interesting.
Yes, very good, actually correct. And not so much that he did before, but Abraham, and this is in a sense Terach's conversion or repent. A really fascinating character. Terach is a fascinating character. Terach is the one who, at the time that Abraham started his evangelism, was very much against his son, to the point where he was willing to sell out his son to Nimrod. Right? Avram comes in, smashes all the idols. Terach rats his son out to Nimrod, which brings to that great showdown when Nimrod throws Avram into the fiery furnace. But in the aftermath of Abraham's demonstrable victory, right, he's in front of all the people, right, Nimrod throws him into the fiery furnace because Nimrod, of all the things he says he's God over, he's the master over, the master of fire is how Nimrod presented himself. His city was Ur-Kasdim. All the cities of under Nimrod's reign were Ur something or other. Ur means fire. In the center of each was a flame. In the center of each of these cities was a massive furnace, massive fire that was a depiction of their fealty to Nimrod, the god of fire. And so in Ur-Kasdim, the capital city, we can imagine it was massive. And this is where Nimrod set up the showdown. The showdown between him and Avram, who claims that everything's only in the power of the one God, creator of heaven and earth, who can't be seen, felt, or fathomed, and Nimrod saying, I am the God, I am the power here, there is nothing more powerful in this region than me, my power is fire, I'm going to throw you into the fire, I'm going to see which power trumps which, right? And that is the great miracle that occurs, that Avram's walking around in the furnace as if he's in a garden. In fact, that's what everybody sees. They see Avram kind of basking in a garden while he's in this fiery furnace. They see the power of God over the God of Avram. The people wanted to serve Avram, right? When Avram comes out of the furnace, miraculously, victoriously, all the people want to bow to Avram because that's what they're used to. Okay, it's not Nimrod who's the real power, it's Avram who's the real power. And Avram says, no, you guys are not listening to what I'm telling you. No human being, nothing in this world is the true power other than God himself. One of his first converts was Terach. His father comes aboard, and Terach leads the whole family out of Ur Kasdim. And that's the quote. But here's the thing, Stuart, that really is the only biblical reference, right? And that was actually in last week's Torah portion. That was not in this week's Torah portion. Last week's Torah portion tells us about Avram, who his father was, who his brother was, their wives, etc., etc. And it says that Avram's brother dies in Ur Kasdim, and his father takes them, the rest of the family, out, and doesn't give us any of the background story. This that we just talked about is the background story, including the death of his brother, because his brother was like a Yankee fan, which is that he was a fair weather fan. He was on Team Nimrod, and then when he the showdown, he kind of said, when he was pressed, which team are you on? He said, let me see the outcome of this little tete-a-tete over here. Let me see how this plays out. And when Avram comes out victorious, all of a sudden Haran raises his banner, I'm Team Avram. And so they throw him into the furnace also. And he's, kind of waiting on the whole notoriety. He'll be in the furnace, he'll come out, and all the notoriety that Avram gets and all the honor and respect, whatever it is, he'll get as well. Well, he didn't go in for altruistic purposes. So God doesn't grant him the same level of protection. He does come out of the furnace intact. He doesn't get burnt to a crisp because God doesn't want that it should be equivocal who really won, Team Avram or not. But he doesn't either survive the ordeal and he dies from the wounds. So Haran does not survive the experience. Uh, uh, but um, but the family does not stay in Ur Kasdim. From that point, Terach leaves. He, as you said, Stuart, he renounces his position with Nimrod, and he becomes a follower of his own son, which is a remarkable thing. Again, that speaks to the character of Terach.
I'm trying to think of another time that happened where that a father followed a son.
There are periods, including, by the way, well, we find a lot of times an elder sibling becomes the follower of his younger sibling, right? Aaron
Yes.
and Moshe. The Rebbe also had that play out. When the Rebbe took over the leadership, his elder brother-in-law, who many thought should be the one to take over, by the way, including their mutual mother-in-law, the wife of the previous Rebbe, said that I believe that it should just be the eldest, right? She saw it as a dynasty more than what it truly was. It was a spiritual um, lineage, and so she focused less on who was more spiritually capable of stepping into her husband's shoes of being the next Rebbe. And so she said, as a dynasty, it should go to the eldest son-in-law. What's interesting is that the eldest son-in-law himself, Rabbi Shmaryahu Gurari, became the most devout chassid of his younger brother-in-law, to the point where there became later a family feud over the books. His son, Rabbi Shmaryahu Gurari's son, laid claim to some of the library that belonged to the Schneerson dynasty, and he says, as the eldest son-in-law of the eldest son of the eldest son-in-law, I lay claim to some of this. And when he asked his father to testify in court against the Rebbe on his behalf, his father said, if you will push me to court, I will testify on behalf of the Rebbe. I will testify not on the side of my own family, but on the side of the Rebbe. So we see, very fascinating. But either way, now there are other cases in history, some of the more obscure names, not necessarily well known, where a son became a devout. In Talmudic times, many such names of a son, of a father becoming a disciple of their son. But either way, Avram, all these stories are not in the Torah. Fascinating omission. Rather, the Torah chooses to start telling us about the relationship that Avram has with God in this week's Torah portion. And it starts off, Vayomer Hashem al Avram, Lech Lecha, right? With that command, Lech Lecha. Now, why is this the significant moment that the Torah chooses to open up the conversation about Avram? What about all these stories that preceded it? None of them are in there. Why is this conversation that he has with God introduction we have into Avraham as the individual that we know him to be?
Well, Lech Lecha is one of the deepest concepts in Judaism, I think. The whole idea of breaking with your past and taking on a new future and a new identity. That's what Avram did in a sense. So it really couldn't be more fundamental.
Good. So you're already going to the content of the conversation. I will back up one bit and say that what makes this conversation unique is not necessarily the content of the conversation, is the fact that they're having a conversation to begin with. This is the first time that God is talking to Avram.
Oh, this is the first time, as far as we know.
The very first time that God reveals himself to Avram and talks to him. Which makes sense that this would be in a sense, a good place to start, because this is the first time God is talking to Avram. What doesn't make sense is, why is this the first time that God is talking to Avram? For 70 years, Avram is holding God's banner. And fascinating, he's got no validation from God that he's in fact correct. He's running for the first 70 years on his own conviction. That's a remarkable thing. Avram is willing to have himself thrown into a fiery furnace. He's willing to devote his life to this, to teach this, to open his tent in all directions, to this conviction without any validation from God that he is in fact right.
The validation may be that Abraham was following this course, and it was godly, that he knew it was inspired by God. So therefore, that may have been the basis of their communication until they came out with a more overt form of communication.
Oh, beautifully well said.
And the other is there's running through Judaism this notion of the father sets the goal and the image for the son to go to. And so this was an upsetting of that also, which was Abraham wasn't going where his father was, and his father was not the model for him, as Judaism would prescribe in all other cases.
I think so. To both your points, point number one, I think that you're making is very important, that there was quote unquote constant communication between God and Avram, was just not in an overt way. I remember I was once giving a class on this parsha, and I was mentioning this point, that exactly what we're talking about now, that this is 70 years into Avram's life, is the first time that God speaks to Avram. And a woman pushed back in kind of in similar terms to what you're saying, Stuart. And she says, what are you talking about? God talks to me all the time. I remember hearing that. My first thought, I say, unfortunately, and to my detriment, my first thought was, she's one of those. You'll be slightly concerned with. But then she clarified, and that's why I say to my detriment, that I didn't give her the credit. She was saying, when I wake up in the morning and I go outside and I see the sun shining and the birds chirping and I see the harmony of existence, et cetera, I don't think of that for granted. That's God talking. That's God talking to us.
Depends how you, right? It's like, it depends what the definition of is. It depends what the definition of talk is.
Right. Our communication. I think in this kind of what Stuart is saying, that we have to recognize, and this is what Avram did recognize. Avram didn't just go on his entirely on his what he believed, his own logic, as it were. He was feeling his neshama. And I think this is an important point to make, and perhaps one of the points that the Torah is trying to make here is too many people say, you know what, I will serve God when God comes and sends me a postcard. Right? When God comes knocking on my door, that's when I'll acknowledge him. Right? Kind of what Pharaoh said when Moshe comes to Pharaoh and says, God sent me and told me to tell you, let my people go. What does Pharaoh say? Who is this God that I should acknowledge him? This God never reached out to me, never asked to have an audience with me. So I should acknowledge his presence. That's a Pharaoh-like statement. The truth is, if you are sensitive enough, that conviction you have deep inside of you that we call a neshama, a soul, that's God's communicating, that hum, that spiritual hum, that sense, that faith. Faith is not the absence of logic. That conviction you have that we call faith is not an absence of logic and just a, you know what, okay, it's like a plan B. Okay, you don't have the logic, so you know what, then just believe. No, faith is an incredibly powerful tool that's in your toolbox right alongside logic. And it's the way you know even when you don't understand. The same way, kind of like as we talk about the other impulse or the other tool that we have that defines our reality besides logic, we call that love. Love is not based on logic. It doesn't mean logic doesn't have some role to play. Obviously, it's logical how you met somebody, and that there are certain things that line up, right? Logically, certain things we have in common and what have you. But at the core of it, don't reduce love to logic, right? As I say often, if your kids eventually, sit down, happily married to your spouse, and they're sitting next on the couch, and the kids turn, you say, "Mom, Dad," right? So, how did you tell us? How did you know? How did you, what? And if one turns to the kids, like the dad turns and says, "Well, it was logical. You're going to be sleeping on the couch that night, right? You've reduced our relationship to arithmetic. That's all it is. It's logic. In other words, love is far deeper, more compelling than logic. Even if I can't explain it as an arithmetic problem or logical deduction, it doesn't mean that it's not 100% true and real and powerful. And even though God had not yet revealed himself in a blatant way to Avram, doesn't mean that Avram wasn't feeling the conviction of his soul, the truth of it. And he knew this, he recognized that this was right and correct, even if he didn't have empirical evidence, as it were.
I've heard, I think it was Jonathan Sachs drew this distinction, which I find hard to get my arms around, that Judaism is not a religion of faith, it's a religion of belief. And I never quite grasped what the distinction was, but apparently there is one amongst commentators, because I've seen that from other sources, that this very strong desire to separate the faith from belief, and it seems to me that the separator has to be logic. I mean, that you don't have to explain blind faith, but if you want to justify why you believe, you have to offer some kind of a logical syllogism. Maybe in the final step, with all these logical syllogisms, in the final step, it's a step of blind faith. But until you get there, there's an attempt at rationalization.
Well, I would flip it. I would flip it, and I agree with you with what you're saying, but to a point. And I think what he's saying is, and I think he's just using the terms faith and belief to connote a difference. I don't know if it is absolutely implicit in the meanings of these two words, but he's using them to kind of differentiate. So faith would be beneath logic, because I don't have logic, I have to fall back on faith, right?
Yeah.
And then oftentimes we therefore in those kind of scenarios we discourage asking questions, right? Because um, that could threaten the house of cards, as it were, right?
Yeah.
Belief,
The house of cards, which is faith.
which is that faith, don't look too hard, because if you pull up the blindfold, maybe you'll see something that will call this whole thing into question, right? So don't ask too much, just accept it on faith, right? And I think that's how he's using the term faith. And I think how he's using the term belief is not that it's based on logic, but it's not beneath logic either. It's not illogical, it's supra-logical.
So what is,
Logic,
so what, I'm still struggling with it. What is the difference between belief and faith?
faith is, I don't ask questions. I don't ask questions because I'm going to act in this as stupid as possible. I'm not going to ask. I'm just going to accept.
You're
I'm
not going
gonna
to
turn-
apply your reasoning ability
I'm
at
going to turn
all.
off my rationale. I'm going to turn my logic, and that's the way I approach this. It's passive, as it were. It's passive, right? I just accept. Just tell me, and I accept, right? And that's what's demanded. Belief, as the way he would use it, is the opposite. Lean in, get active, ask your questions, etc., because that's all. Because your questions don't threaten here. Why? Because even though, and this is important, Stuart. This is, I think, a key difference, because belief, faith, belief, either one of them, they're both not logic, because logic is logic and belief is belief. So the answer is not that faith is not logic and belief is logic, because if belief is logic, we don't need another word for logic. We can just use the word logic. Belief is very different than logic. Faith and logic are antithetical, right? Don't question, because that will threaten faith. If the way he's using it, I don't necessarily agree that those are implicitly connoted in those words, but in what I think Rabbi Sachs is trying to use those two words to differentiate, this is what I think he's saying. There's many people whose faith is blind faith. Judaism doesn't want you to have blind faith. Judaism never wants you to suspend the understanding and that ability in that God Himself has gifted you with. Atachonein la'adam da'at, as we say in the Amidah, that God has gifted each and every one of us with the ability to think, to ponder, to gauge in intellectual enterprise, and not only to reserve that just for worldly matters, but to use that about God also. This is the theme of the course, Stuart. I will send you the recording of lesson 1. We spent an hour and a half exactly on this subject. Tuesday is the opening lesson in this course on my God, because it's.
Hey, I was supposed to be in that class.
So you will get the recording today. Actually, we will send an email with the link to the recording of that class.
I don't get anything, any emails from you. I don't get anything.
Jerry, you sound like my Bobby. You don't call, you don't send emails. Right. You will. I will make sure. No, because this is not going to be sent out onto our bulk emailing list.
Okay, send me an email, please. And also, I was supposed to get the books. Somebody was supposed to send them to me for both your course and Tommy's.
All right, so that will also be done. You will get them. Jerry, we will take care of you. But either way,
that faith is that faith?
Right.
It's neither faith nor belief.
So what is the difference? Because here's the thing: in a place where I can have logic, I have logic. Logic takes care of it. If I'm able to have logic entirely about God, then why do I need belief? The answer is because it's illogical to assume that you can use logic entirely to comprehend God. God is infinite. He is not finite, which means your logic, which is very definitively finite, I don't care if you are the drunk on the Bowery or you are Albert Einstein, Your logic is finite. You have a brain that weighs 5 pounds and it's whatever, how many inches wide it is, whatever it is. And if you think you can fit an infinite God into your very finite brain matter, you are illogical. So then what is the proper tool in the toolbox? If logic is not the proper tool to engage in the infinite God, then logic demands from you to engage another tool. Logic has to correctly get out of the driver's seat. It doesn't have to get out of the car, and that's very important. Faith would say logic has to get out of the car. And the way Jonathan Sachs is saying it, faith would say logic out of the car. Your very existence threatens me. So you have to get out of the car. Belief says logic, stay in the car, be my right hand, be my navigator, be in the front passenger seat, but you're not driving this ship because you can't, because you're limited. You have an ability within you called belief that is not limited like logic is. And as I said, that's like love, right? Logic is not antithetical to love, but it's not the same thing. And in the times that you use love, you don't use logic entirely. You can have logic partner, but it is not in the driver's seat. That's why, in theory, a robot, which is a logic machine, we kind of accept that the one thing a robot will not be able to really truly do is love, right? It can engineer better. It can compute logical equations better than a human being. But can a robot ever truly love? No, because love is not logic. Love is a more powerful. It's a more powerful. It can mimic love. You can definitely create a robot that can mimic love, that can kind of play act at love, right? You can program a robot that as soon as you come through the door, say, "Oh, honey, welcome home," and give you a hug, right? But are you going to marry that robot? Even if it mimics love so well, it gives you the hug, it makes supper, it laughs at all your jokes, right?
If I marry the robot, do I get a ketubah?
Right? You get a ketubat, is what you get.
Funny.
But
Very good.
either way, so the same way we
Rabbi,
understand.
can I interrupt for 1 second? You said that Abraham, that Judaism doesn't want you to have blind faith, and yet for the first 70 years, wasn't that pretty much what
No, see that
Abraham had?
good. This is exactly what we're saying, and kind of what I think Stuart. This is how we got into the whole conversation. So just as we say love is not logic, and it doesn't mean that it's illogical, it means it's supra logical, right? Love is beyond logic. It's not beneath logic, it's beyond logic. And that's why I'm not threatened by logic. I'm not saying, I don't want to hear, I don't want to, no. You know, when I'm talking about my love, it's not like somebody says, but wait, I'm like, no. I'm saying, ask your questions. Ask your questions, go ahead. Many of them I'll be able to answer, many of them won't, and that's still not going to threaten the love. And I definitely have to employ a tremendous amount of logic in love, right? I have to understand that my spouse logically likes a clean house or likes a bouquet of flowers every once in a while. That's logic, right? And I can't say I don't have to do all this stuff because we have love, right? See how long that works for you. No, you need to apply logic and love as well. Love is the foundation upon which you build a tower of logic. Same thing, that's belief. Belief is a foundation of belief and a tower of logic on top of it, of understanding. Understand God, understand the way God works, understand what your relationship with God is. Don't just do blind faith. Wrong. Have a textbook on God and have a notebook and do your homework and study and know all of God's different names and God's different dispositions. At the same time, that the bedrock of all of it is belief. And that's the difference. Faith negates logic. Belief welcomes logic, but understands that while 90% of the day, of your day, logic will define your reality. If it makes logical sense, it's right. And if it does not make logical sense, it's wrong. 90% of the time, logic is in the driver's seat. But there is a crucial 10% of your life, the love you have for your wife, the kids, whatever it is, where logic is not in the driver's seat. It has to be comfortable stepping out of the driver's seat. Why are you doing this thing for your child? It's illogical. Yes, but I love him. And get out of the way. Right? Logic, get out of the way, get into the passenger seat. Help be my navigator, right? Because in love, I need to apply logic to navigate my love correctly. Yes, but you're not the driver. Love is the driver. And when it comes to belief, belief is the driver. And logic is along to help out. Logic is along. We don't negate the logic, but logic is not either the driver. So that's the key difference. To the point that Jerry brought up, did Avram have blind faith? No, that's exactly why the Midrash tells us that he goes through this logical process of looking at the sun and looking at the moon and seeing that they don't fit the bill. So logic is part of this. Logic is part of it. Avram is not being illogical. Avram could make a logical argument, as he does, right? All the people that come into the shop, right? And want to serve an idol, Avram makes cogent logical arguments why they are being illogical in assuming that this block of wood is God, right? So he does apply logic. He's the most logical among the entire world at that time. But it's not only logic. It is very much belief. And that belief is the conviction we know. It's not just belief is something that we know, we recognize is a very good word. We recognize the truth of it. I can recognize the truth of something even without necessarily understanding the logical parameters of this truth. Do I understand that the reason when I come out of a shower I'm cold is because there is a process of micro evaporation happening, right? The beads of water that are on me are evaporating, and evaporation is a cooling process, and that's the reason I'm cold. Do I need to know that in order to know that I'm cold? Do I need to know the process to be able to understand that I'm cold? No, I know I'm cold. Do I know necessarily the parameters of why that is? No. Avram has that conviction. God is. Do I understand exactly how he is? And the parameters of his isness, of his existence? No, but I know that I recognize that he is. And on that conviction, and it's something I feel deep at the core of my being. It's as true to me as anything else. And I'm not going to shy away from it. I'm not going to, oftentimes we know true information. You know, what is the expression inconvenient truth? Way before Al Gore did not coin that phrase. Al Gore borrowed that phrase. It meant always something before. What's the concept behind an inconvenient truth? That sometimes you recognize the truth, but it's inconvenient to recognize it because there's a call to action with that recognition and you're not up to it. If I recognize that this is true, then I should be changing my ways, or I should be doing something, or I should stop doing something. I'm not in the mood. I'm not in the mood. I'm not interested. It's inconvenient to know this truth. Ignorance is bliss, right? So it's very likely that many people in the days of Avram had that niggling recognition of truth. Deep down, they knew what Avram was saying was correct. But it's a lot easier to disregard that truth. If all I have to do in order to get on the good side of the powers, as it were, is bring a meal offering to this stump of wood, and then I know that I can leave the stump of wood behind and he can't follow me and he can't pay attention to me and whatever it is, and I can go and then live my life however I want, that's a very convenient doctrine that I've subscribed to. Kind of like other doctrines that say you only have to pop in to the place of your house of worship once a week, say a couple of prayers and whatever it is, and you also can get granted absolution, then you go out and carry on with your day. That's great religion. Love it. Very convenient. Avram, the reason that he's a champion is not simply because he recognized the truth, but then he answered the call to action that comes with that recognition of truth. And this leads us to this very important point, and kind of what Jerry was saying. Now that we know that this conversation that Avram is having with God, it's not even a conversation, it's really a monologue. It's not even a monologue, it's God issuing a command. That's the length of the conversation, right? God gives his command, and if Abraham says anything, the only thing he says is, aye, aye, sir. right? He doesn't really have much. We don't see that Avram then responded back to God. Rather, Vayomer Hashem el Avram, God tells Avram, and what is the first thing? What is this inaugural address? Right? We make a big deal of inaugural addresses. Why? Because it's not just simply the first words we heard of this person as they have been now made president, king, whatever it is. An inaugural address is because in those first words, they're setting the agenda, right, for the entire relationship. They have now been appointed president of the entire United States. In this inaugural address, they are going to paint the picture. They are going to present the trajectory of this relationship, right? Same holds true here. First words, and the Torah goes out of its way to record these words, and in fact to introduce Avram, and Avram relationship with God, and the first Jew. In other words, this is the introduction to all of our relationship with God. And what is this inaugural address? Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha. Go. This is not simply pragmatic, because again, the Torah does not highlight every little conversation. And if God was telling Abraham, leave just because I need you to go from point A to point B, guaranteed it's not in the Torah. It wouldn't be recorded in the Torah, because who cares? That was something that God had to tell Avram because he couldn't be in point A, he needed to be in point B. There is a very powerful eternal lesson when God turns to Abraham and says, Lech Lecha. And the eternal lesson, not just to Avram, but to all of Abraham's kin forever thereafter. This is the inaugural address of God to a Jew. Lech Lecha. What does this mean, and how do we understand this? Importantly, we know kind of the famous depiction, the wandering Jew, right? This is not a new expression. It's actually based on a painting. I'm not sure who made the painting, but the typical Jew with a satchel on his back, kind of bent over under the burden of their wandering, the wandering Jew. And it has really was painted because it acknowledges what seems to be a paradigm, a historical paradigm of the Jewish people. They're always wandering in the desert, wandering in exile, wandering in Babylon, wandering in Persia, wandering in Rome, always wandering. Right? Exile, wandering.
I think what they needed was a good GPS.
Right, exactly. You know, they say that God takes the people out of Egypt with the plan to take them to the promised land of Canada. But the problem was that Moshe had a stutter. And so he turns to the people and says, we're going to Canaan. Oh, Canaan, okay. Right? But the other joke is that why would the Jews wander in the desert for 40 years? Because Moshe wasn't a woman and therefore didn't stop to ask for directions.
Correct.
Right? But either way, the bottom line is that it seems to be that this is a bug of the Jewish story. Right? It's just one of these things that we're constantly wondering. This quote, Lech Lecha, tells us this is not a bug, it's a feature. This is not just an unfortunate happenstance of the Jewish people. This is a defining attribute of the Jewish people. Lech Lecha is
a defining feature or the defining feature?
Yes.
Because if it's the defining feature, then I guess we don't get to go back to to Israel until the Mashiach comes, right?
So that's why I said yes. Is it a defining feature or the defining feature? The answer is in ways it is the defining feature, but don't misunderstand. What do I mean by this? I mean to say, and this is the key word here, we are not the wandering Jews. We weren't the wandering Jews in the desert either. The word masa'ot, masa is not a wander. It's a journey. We are the journeying Jews. There's a very big difference between wandering and journeying. Wandering means that you are aimless, you are goalless, you're not really going anywhere, and the only thing that defines you is the fact that you are not settled. You are wandering. When you are journeying, then the defining aspect is not even so much that you are not settled, but it's that you are heading somewhere. God turns to Abram and he says, you, as the progenitor of the Jewish people, have to remember that I created the world for a purpose. And currently, the world has not at its purpose. So to settle into the status quo is unacceptable. To stop journeying is unacceptable. This is not where this story is supposed to end. And until we get there, there's no retirement. And so, as the entire world needs to journey, and I've made the Jewish people the Mamlechet Kohanim, the light unto nations, then it is going to become a feature of the Jewish people that they will not settle. This is who they are. They are not the wandering people. They are the journeying people, because they are there carrying the banner that of really of all of creation. That all of creation, this is the theme that we've been talking about from the get-go. Bereshit, in the midst of the beginning, the world was created with a purpose, with an intent. Creation was not an impulsive move by God. It was a thought out and a planned and an intentional act, which means that it has a purpose, it has a goal. And we have not yet reached the goal. And if we have not yet reached the goal, are we allowed to settle? And the answer is no, we are not. And so the hallmark of the Jewish people is that they are journeyers. Now, to your question, Jerry, so then why can't we just say that this is the feature of the Jewish people? Because the goal is not to journey forever. Because that's not the end. That's not the goal. That's the means to the end. We're just willing to say that until we get to the end, we won't stop. So currently, it's the feature. In the big scheme, in the big picture, the goal is the feature. Arriving at the goal is the feature. There is a goal. God created the world for a purpose and for a reason. And we will not settle until we arrive there. We are very much goal-oriented. We are not, that is another, as we said, that is the difference between wandering and journeying. Wandering is without a goal, is aimless. There is no aim.
Right.
Journeying is you always have your eye on the prize. You always have. The one who stops journeying is the one who's taken his eyes off the prize and settles for wherever they are along the journey. It's like trying to make your way to New York. I'll just use it, and then saying, "Nah, I'm going to live from now on in a rest stop in New Jersey." That's not the goal. It's interesting that, believe it or not, there is a lore that goes back and it says, how did Poland get its name? Poland, which at one point or another was the great epicenter of Jewish life. Jews lived in Western Europe. right? Even the Sephardim were Western Europeans. In fact, Sephardim were more Western European than the Ashkenazim. Ashkenaz is Germany. The word Sephardim means Spain. Then in a series of expulsions that really hit every country of Western Europe, because any country that was loyal to the Catholic Church or some offshoot of it, which even included, you know, the Anglican Church, at one point or another expelled their Jews. Every last country of Western Europe, bar none. England, France, Germany, we know Spain and Portugal, obviously, Austria, all expelled their Jews. So Jews who had come there because life in the Roman Empire had kind of forced that, right? The Jews, destruction of the temple, Jews forced into the Roman Empire. Roman Empire starts falling apart. They go into the Byzantine Empire. Byzantine Empire eventually disintegrates, and you have Europe. And here the Jews find themselves in Western Europe, right? Then Western Europe becomes incredibly untenable for the Jewish people. So what do the Jewish people do? They start heading towards Israel, journeying back home. They want to go back home. They eventually arrive in a place, and in their minds, very clearly, very definitively, they are not here to settle. They are just stopping. They're just passing through. They're just resting here on their way further. Anybody know how you say resting here in kind of a little bit Hebrew with a little bit of Aramaic inflection? How do you say here in Aramaic and Hebrew?
Oh,
Po. How do you say to rest in Hebrew?
manuach.
Lanuach, right? Well, lanuach means rest. How do you mean to like?
Lishaer.
Lishaer means to stay. If I want to say, but I want to sleep the night, we say lina.
Oh, lun, la, lun.
Lalun, right? Lalun,
Lalun.
lalin,
Yeah.
right? If I want to say, we will rest here. Po, lin,
Lean. Pauline.
polin. Except
Wow.
that rest ended up being
Pretty bad.
centuries long.
Right.
And
But
that's
you're saying that the Jews from Spain,
the Jews from Spain, that the Spanish expulsion led to them going to North Africa and then eventually into the Ottoman Empire. And they actually made it to Israel. And the Jews from Germany, et cetera, the Ashkenazi Jews that then experienced their bout with expulsion, they made their way through Europe and came to Poland, found a more benevolent, but never planned on staying. They called it Polin. And like I said, unfortunately, they made a mistake we have to never make. We are constantly journeying, not until we come to the proverbial promised land. And it doesn't just mean to the geographical coordinates of the land of Israel. Of course, the land is a holy land, but we need to turn it into the holy land. We are on a journey. Jews living in the diaspora, Jews living in Israel. We are on a journey that started with Avram and will only end once we reached our goal, the times of Mashiach. This is a very important message and lesson to each and every one of us. It is a hallmark of the Jewish people to never settle. Don't settle, right? That's why a Jew, right? That's why Jews also in business, we never settle, right? but importantly, Avram, even once he settles in the land of Canaan, what does he call himself? Avraham Ivri.
Ivriani, whatever it says.
Ivri Anochi.
Ivrianochi.
What does Ivri Anochi mean? I'm from the other side of the tracks.
Yeah.
I'm a stranger. Wherever I am, even though at that point Avram was not only, he was the owner of all this land. He actually purchased Avram out at a certain point. You're living in the land of Canaan. You are no longer the, what's it called? You are no longer the stranger in the midst. You are, this is your land. Everybody else who's coming in is the stranger. And yet Avram understood that as a Jew, and that's why the word Ivri has stuck with us as a people. Because until we arrive at our goal, you're still only passing through. We are on a journey. Our goal is not to settle for anything less than the goal. So until the goal, we will not settle.
And even if we happen to live in the state of Israel, we can still look at it that way.
As we do, we're still in Galut, even in the land of Israel.
Galut, yeah.
And that's the bottom line. This is why this is the first command to the first Jew. And the first interaction, or the first fact that the Torah records about Avram personally is this, that God told him, Avram, you're my guy. And as my guy, here's your mission. Start the journey. Start the journey that the Jewish people will be on until the job is done. All right?
Thank you. That was
you.
great.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
All my
shalom.
people lost a good one. Please upload this one, Rabbi. And also make sure that last week's was uploaded so I can tell Alois
It's all
where to get
there.
it.
Last week's is already uploaded, and by the
Okay.
end of today, this one will be.
And you'll send it to me.
Yeah.
Thank
All right.
you.